For 12 years, my world was measured in failure rates, defect codes, and actuarial curves. I was the quiet steward of our warranty reserve, the shadow line on the balance sheet that no one paid attention to until it exploded. My role wasn't glamorous. There were no ribbon cuttings or press releases, but when a car left the lot, my calculations traveled with it, tucked invisibly under every contract, predicting with near-surgical precision how much each squeak, leak, or dead-on-arrival component would cost us. I had built the models from scratch. I was the one who noticed that a 2-cent gasket failure in a transmission valve could snowball into a $3.200 replacement. I rewrote the claims coding system so we didn't confuse a leaky hose with a cracked block. I set the triggers for accruals, the algorithms that automatically drained money from revenue and into the reserve when incidents spiked. Every morning, executives walked into meetings and looked at a simple green-to-red dashboard that I designed. If it glowed red, launches froze until the issue was fixed. It wasn't optional. It was the gate I guarded. People called me obsessive. Maybe I was. But obsession is what saved the company hundreds of millions when our crossover SUV had a defective fuel pump batch. My early detection pulled the line before regulators ever touched it. The CEO congratulated himself at the town hall, but I was the one who knew what it had cost to hold the reserve steady. Still, subtle tremors had started appearing. Meetings without my invitation. Roadmaps drawn by executives who thought quality meant customer surveys instead of engineering data. And most telling of all, the CEO's son, newly appointed as Chief Commercial Officer, once asked me why we needed so much money sitting idle in a reserve. He called it deadweight. I remember my stomach tightening because I could already see the mistake they were preparing to make, believing that the only line item worth cutting was me. The fracture began as a polite calendar invite. Launch readiness alignment. 10 names. Mine was last. The room was glass and chrome, set to the temperature of a hospital. On the screen, the new crossover's codename pulsed in a heroic font. The CEO's son stood at the head of the table like a keynote speaker. He praised the team. He praised the ads that had not run yet. He did not mention the brake booster variants that still drifted beyond the upper control limit on my chart. When it was my turn, I spoke in the same measured voice I always used. The mean time between failure on the booster was trending down. Field test claims were rate adjusted for mileage growth and still spiking. Under policy WR11, that triggered an automatic accrual uplift and a red gate on the dashboard. "We do not ship red," I said. His smile thinned. "We do if the customer wants it." 2 days later, he called another meeting. No engineers this time. Only him, the CFO, legal, and me. A single slide filled the wall. Warranty reserve optimization. He called it optimization the way a pickpocket calls it efficiency. He asked why we were carrying 6.2% of revenue in the reserve when peers reported 5%. I explained cohort behavior, lag effects, and our risk portfolio. I showed the actuarial memo where I documented the method. I pointed to the claims adjudication error rate that I had driven below 2% by rewriting code tables. He nodded, then asked why the gate required my name. "Because risk has to belong to someone," I said. "If the name is everyone, the gate is no one." He turned to legal. "Can we reassign sign-off to product?" Legal glanced at me, then at the CFO. "We can modify the charter." The son folded his arms. "Do it." The charter update arrived as a red line at 10:41 p.m. They moved quality launch right, QLR3, and reserve trigger RT2 from required, owner of warranty risk, to required, product GM or delegate. The dashboard would still glow, but the person holding the switch would be the one under pressure to launch. I replied with a memo that might as well have been a prayer. I cited SOX 404. I cited COSO. I showed how moving the sign-off to a revenue owner created a material weakness in controls. I reminded them that our retail agreements allowed dealers to invoke make-good clauses if field failures exceeded the baseline by 2 standard deviations within the first 90 days. The son wrote back 2 lines. "We need to be bold. Green light for Friday." Friday came like a storm front. The dashboard remained red. The product GM stepped over it. The son announced the launch in a video with bright music and too many cuts. The first weekend, the cars flew off lots. The first week, my phone filled with silence. No one wanted numbers. They wanted photographs of ribbon cuttings. Then the silence broke. Claims started streaming in, first a drip, then a river. Booster failures. ABS anomalies. The auto-accrual algorithm, which was still mine, began to move. Each spike pulled dollars from revenue into the reserve. My system did exactly what it was built to do. The CFO pinged me on Monday at 7:12 a.m. "Are you sure about the 1.35 uplift coefficient?" I sent him the regression. I sent him the confidence intervals. I sent him the clause that said if we saw this pattern, we had to re-estimate immediately. By Wednesday, the son requested a reset. He asked if we could pause auto-accruals until marketing noise cleared. The request hung in the air like smoke. Auto-accruals are not noise, I said. They are law and math. He stared at me the way people stare at a locked door. That afternoon, HR scheduled a one-on-one. The conference room was small. A tissue box sat in the center like a white flag. "We're restructuring," she began, her eyes flicking to a script. "The company is moving to a more agile model. Your role is being eliminated." "Today?" She slid an envelope toward me. I looked at it, then at her, then back at the window where the city kept breathing without us. "Who owns WR11 now?" I asked. She read from the paper. "Product." I could not help it. I laughed once, not out of rudeness but disbelief. "Then you don't own a policy. You own a wish." I packed my desk slowly. I left the laminated copy of the launch charter for the intern. I took my notebooks. I took my memory. I walked past the glass wall where they were clapping for a sales milestone. Outside, the sky had that bleached color it gets before rain. I felt the loss like a bruise under the ribs. Not just the job. The covenant. I had defended the invisible. I had stood between enthusiasm and ruin. Now I was dismissed as an obstacle to velocity. The building's revolving door made a slow circle. As it spun me into the street, my phone buzzed with the field bulletin that would have kept me there. Early claims had breached the 90-day floor line in 12. The waterfall had started. It did not care who held the red pen. I went home and sat at my kitchen table. I opened my laptop because that is what I do when things hurt. I read the retailer agreements I had negotiated line by line. I searched for the words "make good" and counted them like a litany. I pulled up the audit trail in my secure archive and saw my name on every gate that mattered for the last 10 launches. I typed a single line in my journal. They called me replaceable. Then they removed the person who knew where the ceiling leaks when it rains. I closed the book and felt a steady calm settle in. Not anger, not even grief, something cleaner. The feeling of a problem that could be solved by patience, records, and light. The first clear thought arrived as I read our quarterly filing calendar. The company would have to sign its internal control certification in 3 weeks. The reserve method change and the moved gate would exist in black and white. If they paused auto-accruals to preserve optics, the misstatement would not be a rumor. It would be a line item. If they let the algorithm run, the waterfall would expose the launch as premature. Either path required truth. I poured coffee and opened the folder where I kept every policy I had authored. I read WR11, QLR3, and RT2 like a priest reads liturgy. I was not grieving a title. I was safeguarding a system. That was the moment I understood the scope. My exit had not removed me from the loop. It had removed their last defense against their own optimism. I drew the map on a legal pad. At the center sat the reserve. Around it, I placed the inputs: field claims, dealer labor rates, parts severity ladders, regional humidity multipliers, and the booster failure curve. Then I drew the contracts that wrapped it: retailer make-good clauses, the reinsurance treaty on extended coverage, the supplier's warranty indemnity, and the auditor's reliance on our control design. I wrote the names of the people who could move a lever: the CFO, the head of legal, the product GM, the audit committee chair. Last, I wrote a question I could not ignore: who benefits from silence? The answer was no one. Not customers, not retailers, not the line workers whose bonuses were tied to quarterly results. I made a second list. What can I do without rancor? That list was long. I hired counsel, not to attack, but to anchor my steps to the cleanest standard I knew. We reviewed the whistleblower policy line by line. The company promised a direct line to the audit committee for concerns about internal controls. I drafted a letter that did not accuse, it documented. I attached the red line charter that reassigned the gate from an independent risk owner to a revenue owner. I included my memos citing the control framework and the retailer clauses tied to early field failures. I provided timestamps for the launch meeting, the warning email, and the dismissal. I recommended specific disclosures for the upcoming filing, reserve methodology, sensitivity analysis, and a description of the change in control over the gate. I asked for nothing in return. I told the truth and I sent it to the chair with delivery confirmation. Then I turned to the retailers. Over a decade of audits and joint working sessions had built trust that no marketing deck could fake. Store managers kept my number for the days when systems froze and customers waited. I called 3 of the largest and asked for 10 quiet minutes. I explained the pattern I was seeing and what their contracts allowed. I also explained the cost of an indiscriminate make-good invocation. Cash would move, but customers would not be safer, and service bays would still clog. I proposed a different path, a structured service program with accelerated reimbursements, parts pre-positioned by region, and a measured pause on bonus chargebacks if specific metrics were met within 30 days. I would not negotiate for the company. I would offer a framework that protected their customers and their economics. I asked if they would support it if I could get the company to accept it. The answer was yes, if my name was on the plan. The fix itself had to begin at the cause. I built a stabilization playbook that did not require my old badge to execute. First, supplier containment, quarantine suspect lots, increase incoming inspection levels, and rerun process capability on the booster line with real torque trace data. Second, field triage. Assign risk scores by mileage, climate, and driving profile, and prioritize service slots accordingly. Third, communication. A plain language bulletin to service writers that differentiated noise from a real symptom so customers were seen once, not 3 times. Fourth, reserve method. Commit to a rolling re-estimate every 72 hours using incident rate by cohort instead of a blended historical average. Fifth, governance. Restore an independent risk owner for the launch gate with direct access to the audit committee until the cohort returned below the control limit. I wrote each step as a checklist. I attached responsible names and an expected impact on the accrual curve. I did not use adjectives, only actions and numbers. I registered a small firm that afternoon. Cumulative Risk Partners was a name that made sense to me. I wrote a 1-page engagement letter with 3 requirements. First, an independent mandate to oversee the service program and the reserve method until stabilization. Second, the reinstatement of QLR3 and RT2 under an independent owner codified by board resolution. Third, indemnification for acting in good faith, because truth needs a roof in a storm. My fee was not a provocation, it was a fraction of 1 hour of the waterfall. I set the term at 90 days with an option to extend by mutual agreement. I printed the letter and placed it next to the playbook. Before I contacted the company, I placed one more call. The reinsurance treaty on extended warranties included a clause requiring notification of material changes to the control environment. I had been the named risk owner for that treaty. I informed the reinsurer that I no longer held that role and that I had sent a governance memo to the audit committee. I did not opine on coverage. I did not ask for action. I placed the fact in the record. It would ensure that any attempt to bury the change would face an external daylight check. The reinsurer thanked me and said they would await the company's response. I hung up and felt the knot in my chest loosen. I ended the night the way I used to end crisis days at my desk. I simulated the curve. I projected the reserve draw at the current incident rate. It worked out to $750,000 roughly every 45 minutes across all cohorts and geographies. A frightening number if you did not believe in levers. A manageable number if you did. I wrote one more line in my journal. This is not revenge. This is a rescue that must be asked for. Then I placed the playbook, the engagement letter, and the audit committee receipt in a neat stack. The city outside had gone quiet. In the morning, I would call the CFO and offer them the only cheap line item left, a path back to green that cost less than pride. At 8:03 the next morning, I called the CFO. I did not rehearse. I stated facts. Field failures had breached the 90-day floor. The reserve algorithm was pulling cash as designed. Retailers were within their rights to invoke make good, but I had a framework that could protect customers, stores, and liquidity. He did not argue. He asked for documents. I sent the playbook and the one-page engagement letter. He went quiet for 12 minutes, then forwarded an invite from the audit committee chair, boardroom, 10 o'clock. They were waiting when I arrived. The chair sat at the center with a legal pad. The external auditor had a slim folder and an unreadable face. The CEO's son was present, restless. I repeated the core of the letter. 90 days. Independent mandate to oversee the service program and reserve method. Reinstate QLR3 and RT2 under an independent owner by board resolution. Indemnification for good faith. The chair asked 3 questions. Would the plan reduce incident rate in 30 days? Yes, if supplier containment started today. Would the method changes be documented and auditable? Yes, every reestimate would carry an explanation of change and a sensitivity table. Would I accept a direct reporting line to the audit committee for the duration? Yes. The auditor spoke once. If the board restores an independent gate and documents the change, we can rely on the control. The chair nodded, approved. The sun shifted. We cannot put him between product and our launch pipeline. The chair closed his pen. Then you can explain to the reinsurer why coverage attaches to a control that answers to revenue. I set up the stabilization room in a spare conference space 2 floors below. No banners, no slogans, just screens and a schedule that did not slip. We began with supplier containment. I asked the quality director to order a line stop on the booster assembly and isolate suspect lots by date code. We pulled torque trace data from the fastening stations and overlaid it with failure returns. A pattern emerged. A check valve seat had drifted out of alignment after a fixture replacement at 2:14 on a Thursday. The deviation was less than a millimeter but enough to cause a vacuum leak under high heat cycles. We wrote the 8D on the spot. Immediate containment. Quarantine all boosters built between the fixture change and the corrective calibration. Root cause. Fixture wear and inadequate verification step in the PPAP. Corrective action. Replace the fixture, recertify with a capability study, and add a redundant gauge check to the process. I watched the supplier's plant manager swallow hard and then agreed a full cost share under the indemnity clause I had negotiated 5 years earlier. Next came field triage. We assigned risk scores by VIN using exposure, climate, and driving profile. Desert heat increased priority. Stop-and-go commuters rose. Long highway miles dropped. We pushed allocations to retailers through the EDI feed by dawn. Parts kits, loaner support, and a service time standard that prevented overbilling and under-repair. Service riders received a plain language bulletin that distinguished harmless noise from the true symptom. Extended pedal travel after high heat soak with a soft return. They learned to test once, not 3 times. We estimated bay hours needed by district and replenished loaners through fleet partners instead of cannibalizing sales. Operations grumbled, then complied when the retailer councils signed on. The reserve method became the metronome. Every 72 hours we re-estimated by cohort, instead of an all-in historical blend. Each run carried an explanation of change, a roll forward of prior estimates, and a sensitivity table showing the impact of a 10% swing in incident rate. The CFO reviewed numbers twice daily. He stopped asking to pause noise. The waterfall continued, but the curve began to bend. Draws slowed, then flattened in the high-risk districts where parts hit first. The auditor sat with us for an hour each day to review evidence of design and operation. They did not need persuasion. They needed paper. We gave it to them, numbered, signed, time-stamped. Communication had to be as clean as the math. Legal drafted an owner letter within the voluntary service program framework. We removed adjectives, added dates, and taught the call center how to escalate real symptoms. No deflection, no blame. Customers scheduled once and drove away with a fix, not a promise. Dealers calmed. The first retailer who had threatened to invoke make good sent a note at midnight. If this holds, we will not file. Keep parts coming. Governance was the anchor. The board passed a resolution that restored an independent risk owner for launch gates and reserve triggers, with direct access to the audit committee until cohort incident rates returned below control limits for 3 consecutive weeks. My name was on the resolution, but the role was bigger than me. It was a principle. Risk cannot report to revenue. The Sun tried to reopen the decision. The chair asked him to review the reinsurance treaty and the clause that tied coverage to control independence. He did not bring it up again in that room. There were moments when the plan tried to shake. A midday defect surge in one region after a heat wave. A supplier shipment that failed incoming inspection and threatened to starve service bays. A rumor of a regulator inquiry that spooked sales. Each time we returned to the checklists, we used the surge protocol, reallocated kits, and issued a bulletin within the hour. We logged variances and closed them with evidence. We did not improvise away from the method. The team began to breathe in the rhythm of the re-estimate cycle. Green showed up at the edges of the dashboard like dawn around a blind. On day 19, the supplier met the capability target. CPK cleared 167 on the critical dimension, and the redundant gauge check passed without drift. We released the updated boosters with new date codes and visible tags so service writers could confirm by sight. On day 21, incident rates in the high-risk districts dropped below the upper control limit. On day 24, 3 regions in the north went green. Retailers stopped asking about make good and started asking about sales campaigns. I reminded them we were not done. We needed 3 weeks below limits before we touched the gate. The CFO asked me, in a rare quiet moment, how much money the plan had saved so far. I pointed to the curve. The waterfall still moved, but its slope had halved. The difference between a panic recall and a disciplined service program, between chargebacks and credit memos, between a misstatement and an audited control. You did not save money by cutting me, I said gently. You save it by respecting the work that keeps the roof from leaking. On day 27, we stood up the launch gate review for the next program. The board's resolution made the rules simple. Evidence first. Independent sign-off next. If the dashboard glowed red, no one stepped over it. Not product. Not a calendar. Not a video. The Sun arrived late and left early. He did not speak. The gate held. The room held. And for the first time since I had walked out with my box, I felt the company begin to recognize the quiet backbone that had always been there, hidden inside the numbers, asking for nothing but a chance to be heard. The curve flattened on a Tuesday afternoon. Not by luck, by design. The high heat districts held under the new parts. Service bays cleared. Average time to repair fell under 2 hours. The dashboard that had bled red now showed a tempered green along the bottom edge of each region. The reserve still drew cash, but its slope no longer felt like a fall. I printed the roll forward and carried it upstairs to the boardroom where the audit committee had scheduled its certification review. The external auditor placed our work papers on the table with a small nod. Evidence, not promises. The chair began with simple questions. Did we restore an independent gate? Yes, by board resolution, documented and in force. Did the reserve method change have clear rationale? Yes, with sensitivity tables and explanations of change for each re-estimate. Did the service program satisfy retailer rights under make good? Yes, with written support from councils and no pending chargebacks if metrics held for 30 days. Then she turned to the Sun. Why did you move QLR3 and RT2 under product before launch? He spoke about speed. He spoke about market windows. He said we had to be bold. The auditor asked whether the control could be relied upon when it reported to revenue. He did not answer. The reinsurer's representative, invited for a single agenda item, read one sentence from the treaty. Coverage was conditioned on a control environment independent of revenue influence. The room went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when the outcome has already arrived. We filed an 8K that evening. It disclosed the temporary governance change, the remediation steps taken, and the reinstatement of an independent risk owner. It also described the reserve methodology update and the ongoing re-estimates. There was no drama in the text, only dates, policies, and the fact that controls had worked once they were respected. The market reacted the way markets do to clarity. Not with applause, but with a pause in the fall. Retailers forwarded their own notes to analysts. Service throughput was normalizing. Customers were receiving one-visit fixes. A rumor of a regulator inquiry died when the agency received our 8D, supplier capability data and field results with VIN-level traceability. The investigation ended before it began. The Sun asked for a private meeting. He wanted, I think, a rewrite of history. He wanted to say that bold launches require forgiveness. I listened because listening is part of the job. Then I placed 2 pages in front of him. The charter red line that had moved the gate. The board resolution that had moved it back. There is no feud here, I said. Only a rule. Risk cannot report to revenue. He tried to say my approach was rigid. I told him rigidity kept the roof from leaking. I told him I was not his problem. The waterfall was his problem, and it answered only to physics and contracts. He did not raise his voice. He looked down at the paper with the same expression he had worn in the launch video. Performance without weight. Consequences arrived as minutes, not headlines. The board formed a special committee on control governance. The CEO reassigned the Sun to a role without gate authority. The committee asked me to design the permanent version of what we had built in crisis. A launch office with independent sign-off, a reserve council that met weekly, and a policy that stated in clean language that no product, campaign, or calendar could step over a red state without a written, board-level override. We wrote the policy with nouns instead of adjectives. Ownership, evidence, threshold, action. The kind of text that outlives speeches. The best moment came at a service bay, not a boardroom. A technician named Elise, who had been patching broken schedules for weeks, waved me over and pointed to the tag on a new booster. She squeezed the pedal, held it after heat soak, and nodded once as it returned clean. Feels like it should, she said. Not praise, not a slogan. Truth in the hands of someone who could feel it. I walked back to my car and sat with that sentence. It felt like the company could learn it again. On day 31, we crossed 3 consecutive weeks below control limits in the worst districts. The retailer councils withdrew draft make-good notices. The reinsurer confirmed coverage remained in force. The CFO closed the quarter with a reserve that reflected reality and a certification that he could sign without fear. He asked me what the waterfall was now. I told him the number. It was still money, but it was no longer a cliff. He exhaled in a way I had not heard since before the launch. Then he did something rare. He apologized for how I left. Not in legalese. In human words. We thought your salary was heavy, he said. We did not see what it carried. The board offered me a return. Title. Team. Budget. I read the letter carefully and placed it next to the engagement I had signed for 90 days. I did not say yes. I asked for one change that mattered more than a badge. Codify the principle that saved them. Make the independent gate a bylaw, not a memo. Give it to the role, not the person. The chair smiled like someone who has seen a storm and now respects clouds. The bylaw passed with a simple vote. The next day I signed a new contract of my own choosing. Not as an employee. As the independent steward of the gates, reporting to the audit committee with a mandate to train my replacement before the year ended. Victory is not a throne. It is a hand on a switch that turns red to green at the right time. The Sun avoided the stabilization room after that. He attended public meetings and posted bright videos that did no harm. In private, he learned the rule that will keep customers safe long after he is gone. The reserve stopped eating $750,000 every 45 minutes. It ate less, then less again. Not because fear returned. Because respect did. The quiet kind that pays on time, that signs where it should, that knows a gate is not an insult to ambition but a gift to survival. I walked out of the building at dusk and felt the same city air that met me on the day I was fired. It smelled different now, like metal after rain, like tools put back in their places, like work that will hold. The last meeting did not feel like an ending. It felt like a beginning that had finally learned its lesson. The board adopted the bylaw in plain language. Launch gates and reserve triggers would be owned by an independent risk steward with direct access to the audit committee, protected from commercial pressure. No calendar could overrule a red state without a recorded vote. We recorded the procedure, the evidence, and the test of effectiveness. Not slogans, not speeches. A policy that would outlive me. I spent the next weeks doing work I had wanted to do for years. I built a curriculum for the role that would replace me. We walked through the entire chain, from the first field symptom to the final journal entry. We traced a claim code all the way to the ledger, and then back to a bolt. We practiced the reserve method on real data, until the math became a rhythm. We wrote a playbook for retailer surges, a guide for supplier containment, and a template for the 8-discipline report that turns panic into steps. I invited people who never saw each other in a room, service writers, auditors, plant managers, and the new product leads. Elise came from the bay in her work boots and showed a table of executives what a good brake pedal feels like after heat soak. No one argued with that truth. The company changed because the company was forced to listen. The reinsurer renewed on better terms after the quarter closed, citing control design and the capability study at the supplier. Retailers asked for joint planning sessions instead of threats. Customers wrote notes that did not use marketing words. They described a car that behaved like it should. Finance printed a reserve roll forward that made sense and signed the certification without bargaining with fear. None of it was dramatic. All of it was real. One evening, the CEO stood in the stabilization room and thanked the team. He did not make himself the hero. He said something simple that I will remember. We were taught a rule we should have known. He looked at the bylaw on the wall, then at me, and then at the engineers whose names will never be on a press release. The son was not in the room. He had moved to a role where ambition could not turn a gate into a prop. That was justice enough for me. Consequence is not humiliation. It is a boundary that keeps people safe. I walked to the floor alone after everyone left. The screens were dark. The checklists were stacked. The quiet had weight, the kind that comes when a system is ready to carry itself. I opened my journal and wrote what this season had taught me. Work is dignity when it is trusted. Control is not the enemy of speed. It is the instrument that gives speed a steering wheel. The numbers that look like cost are often the only proof that the company loves its customers enough to tell itself the truth. You do not save money by starving the line that keeps the roof from leaking. You save it by respecting the person who knows where the leaks begin. I did not come back for victory. I came back to build the structure that would make my presence optional. That is the final test of competence. To be able to leave and know the right things will continue. When my successor signed her first gate, the dashboard glowed green, not because hope wished it so, but because evidence said it was earned. She dated the entry, attached the papers, and called the supplier to confirm capability. I watched, then stepped back. The room did not need me to speak. He called me replaceable. In a way, he was right. Once the work is respected, once the policy is law, once the habit is built. But before that, the person carries the weight that no spreadsheet can show. The moral is not complicated. Respect people who hold the quiet levers. Value the talent that saves you from your own impatience. Underestimating competence is not a harmless mistake. It is a debt that comes due, with interest. Integrity is cheaper than a recall, cheaper than a lawsuit, cheaper than $250,000 rolling off the balance sheet every few minutes. In the end, the reserve stopped eating the company because the company learned to feed the truth. Respect, it turns out, is the least expensive line item of all.